Have you felt an unexplainable disconnection from the life you once knew? As if the structures that once defined you, routines, roles, relationships, have quietly crumbled, leaving behind a strange emptiness that logic cannot soothe. And yet, amid that inner silence, there is a flicker, a whisper that refuses to be silenced. It says, "Keep going." What if I told you this inner unraveling is not your failure, but your passage? That this disorientation, this aching sense of misalignment, is not the end, but the beginning of something sacred. Carl Jung, the great cartographer of the soul, did not see suffering as senseless. He saw it as a symbolic initiation, an alchemical fire that purifies, not punishes. When your outer world begins to collapse, when what once mattered loses its meaning, it is often a sign that the soul is rising from the depths of the unconscious to reclaim its throne. You are not broken, you are awakening. The pain, the loss, the loneliness, they are not signs of dysfunction but of transition. In Jung's words, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And so, if you are witnessing the unraveling of your former self, know this: you are not falling apart, you are falling inward, into truth. This is not chaos, this is confirmation, a sacred invitation to return to what is most real within you. And if these signs have begun to appear in your life, it is not by accident. Your soul is speaking, and today we will explore the 9 signs Jung would have us pay attention to, each one a quiet signal that your soul is not sleeping, it is right. When the soul begins its ascent, it rarely announces itself with light, peace, or serenity. Instead, it descends as disruption, as confusion that coils around your heart, as emotional turbulence that disorients the ego. It enters not as bliss, but as discomfort, with everything that once felt familiar. Carl Jung understood this moment not as a collapse, but as the sacred rupture that precedes reformation. This is not a breakdown, it is the first tremor of breakthrough. You are not shattering, you are shedding. And what you are shedding is the version of yourself constructed to survive, to please, to perform. What rises now is not your failure, it is your shadow. In Jung's language, the shadow is not a monster lurking in the dark, but the hidden dimension of your truth, the unspoken emotions, the unlived potentials, the denied instinct, rage, fear, lust, envy. Yes, they may dwell there, but so too do courage, sensitivity, creativity, and the voice that was silenced long ago. The danger lies not in the shadow itself, but in the refusal to see it. For what remains unconscious governs our lives from the dark. That is why Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you feel torn between who you were and who you are becoming, when your life feels like it no longer fits, this is the first signal. A betrayal, a loss, an existential crack in your carefully arranged world may trigger it. But what is really collapsing is the illusion of wholeness without self-acknowledge. The persona, the mask you wear to belong, is beginning to dissolve, and what emerges from beneath is not madness, but authenticity. You may find yourself recoiling from conversations that once excited you, shrinking from the shallowness of routine, longing for silence instead of small talk. This is not regression, this is awakening. The outer world starts to feel foreign, not because you're lost, but because you're no longer willing to lie to yourself. And yes, it hurts. Awakening always does. Jung believed that true growth arises through the tension of opposites. The ego demands safety, the soul longs for truth, and when these forces collide within you, the friction ignites transformation. The inner conflict you feel is not dysfunction, it is the birth cry of the self. The ancient self that has waited beneath layers of conditioning now rises, demanding space. And that rising feels like chaos, because everything built upon the old self must fall. But what feels like death is only death to the illusion. As Jung wrote, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. That order is your becoming. The psyche tears away what no longer serves, not to punish, but to purify. So if you feel like you're coming undone, trust the unraveling. You are not descending, you are crossing a threshold. and the threshold always feels like madness until you step through it. You are not breaking, you are breaking open. There comes a moment on the soul's journey when the light of awakening does not feel like illumination, it feels like separation. The faces you once found comfort in grow distant. The rooms that once held laughter now echo with silence. And you, standing in the middle of it all, begin to realize that you are no longer the same. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation, the unfolding of the true self, demands a withdrawal from the collective. Not out of superiority, but because the soul begins to outgrow the frequencies it once resonated with. This departure is not social failure, it is spiritual initiation. You are not just losing people, you are losing who you had to be to keep them. And that unraveling, though lonely, is sacred. As your inner world expands, the outer world often contracts. Friends may fall away, conversations feel empty, even loved ones say, "You've changed," as if transformation were betrayal. But Jung reminds us, what withdraws from the crowd does not isolate, it consolidates. The soul, now awakening, begins to crave something deeper than connection. It craves authenticity. And authenticity has a cost. It often arrives cloaked in loneliness. This is the exile that mystics, sages, and seekers have endured for centuries. Like Christ in the wilderness, Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, or the prophets in their deserts, you too are being called inward, not to escape the world, but to meet yourself beyond it. This is the tension between belonging and becoming. At some point, you can no longer remain in relationships that ask you to be less than whole. The persona, your social mask, begins to slip, and as it does, the projections others cast upon you no longer stick. You are no longer the peacekeeper, the fixer, the compliant child. You stop laughing at jokes that don't resonate. You step back from dynamics built on unspoken contracts of silence and self-betrayal. And yes, you may still love them, but you can no longer betray yourself to keep them. Jung described this rupture not as cruelty, but as the sacred price of becoming real. This isolation is not punishment, it is preparation. As Jung once said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. In this silence, you begin to hear what your soul has been whispering all along. You journal, you walk, you sit beneath the stars, and the more you do, the louder your inner world becomes. The opinions of others lose their grip, the need to explain fades. You stop offering your truth up for approval and start embodying it. And in this quiet, something profound happens. You return to your center. The ego will panic, grasping for validation, grieving lost roles. But the soul rests. Because the soul knows it is not being punished, it is being remembered. Jung saw this solitude as the container for alchemical transformation, the crucible where old identities dissolve and the true self emerges. So if the crowds feel too loud, the smiles too hollow, and the conversations too shallow, honor that. You are not broken. You are being refined. This solitude is not an absence. It is a womb. And in it, something new is gestating. You no longer chase acceptance. You no longer fear misunderstanding. As Jung taught, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming yourself requires walking away from the systems that were never built to contain you. Let others misinterpret your silence. Let them call your solitude strange. That misunderstanding is the mirror showing you how far you've come. When you no longer need to be seen to feel seen, you have entered the true domain of the self. And that is the beginning of power, not as dominance, but as deep inner clarity. The kind that doesn't need applause because it already knows its own worth. There comes a moment on the inner path when the world no longer recognizes you, and perhaps, more painfully, when you no longer fully recognize yourself. You find yourself sitting in the midst of familiar people, yet feeling as though you've vanished from their perception. What once bonded you, shared jokes, mutual dramas, shallow comforts, now echoes with a hollowness you can't unhear. You're not broken, you're not failing, you are withdrawing from the collective, not to escape, but to encounter the self. Carl Jung understood this sacred exile as the beginning of individuation, the soul's calling to separate from the crowd, not out of arrogance, but because the inner voice has become louder than the outer noise. You're shedding resonance, not relationships. You no longer orbit the energies you once called home because your center has shifted. This detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It is the soul refusing to keep feeding illusions for the sake of inclusion. The conversations that once felt engaging now drain you. The laughter that once flowed now feels strained. You're not meant to belong everywhere. The soul, in its rising, outgrows rooms long before the body leaves them. Jung taught that the collective unconscious binds us in shared mythologies and inherited patterns, and awakening often requires stepping outside those inherited scripts. The loneliness you feel is not a punishment, but an initiation. Just as the great archetypes of myth, Moses in the desert, Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, face solitude before revelation, you too are entering a sacred silence. In this space, the self begins to emerge, no longer filtered by expectation or diluted by performance. Your truth becomes audible. Your need for approval fades, and yes, it aches. The soul does not rise without the tearing of old skin, but when people fall away, when circles close, when conversations dry up, it is the unconscious clearing the space for new alignment. Jung warned that friendships rooted in mutual projection or ego roles cannot survive individuation. When you stop being the fixer, the listener, the entertainer, the mirror, the peacekeeper, people may leave. Let them. The roles are dying, and in their place, something wild, truthful, and unshakably you is beginning to breathe. The misunderstanding you now face is not a failure. It is the soul reclaiming its authority. You no longer bend for belonging, because your belonging is no longer external. It is internal, cellular, rooted in the sacred ground of self. And when the world no longer sees you clearly, it is often the sign that you are finally seeing yourself. When coincidences no longer feel random, but orchestrated with eerie precision, you are touching the threshold of the unconscious. You glance at the clock and see the same sequence of numbers again and again. A book falls into your hands as if summoned by the ache in your chest. A stranger utters the very words your soul has been yearning to hear. This is not accident. This is synchronicity. Carl Jung introduced this concept to name the bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the personal psyche and the deeper order that pulses beneath reality. These moments defy linear logic, but pierce the veil of your inner world with surgical clarity. They are echoes of an intelligence that does not speak in facts, but in symbols. They are how the unconscious speaks when the soul is ready to listen. Synchronicity arises not in times of routine, but in times of rupture, when your ego is no longer leading the way, and the self is stirring beneath the surface. In these moments, outer events begin to mirror the inner transformation. You meet people who carry pieces of your unresolved story. Objects reappear as messengers. Dreams spill into waking life. Jung taught that psyche and matter are not two, but one field, what he called the unus mundus, the unified world. Synchronicity is the subtle seam that weaves them together, not through cause, but through meaning. And meaning is the compass of the soul. When synchronicities intensify, it is not madness. It is the soul announcing, you are not alone. You're being spoken to by life itself. The seen and unseen begin to converge, and symbols appear not as decoration, but as instruction. A butterfly appears in your darkest moment. An owl lands when you are seeking wisdom. The number 111 greets you when you are on the edge of change. These are not superstitions. They are psychic signatures. Jung believed that symbols are the primary language of the unconscious. And when the unconscious is active, it speaks not with explanations, but with resonance. The repetition of images, sounds, animals, or numbers is the soul's attempt to get your attention. What appears again and again is not random. It is ritual. It is sacred repetition. In dreams and waking life alike, the same names, phrases, or locations may echo. When what you dream begins to manifest, it is the unconscious reaching into the material world. It is the veil thinning. Jung saw this as a sign that you are accessing not just personal insight, but archetypal wisdom. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the sage. These mythic figures arise not as fantasies, but as energies within the collective unconscious, shaping your inner narrative. When synchronicities orbit these archetypes, it means a deeper story is trying to unfold through you. You are not just making choices, you are embodying a myth. One of the great revelations Jung gave us is that synchronicities grow more vivid as your psyche becomes more receptive. Not because life changes, but because you change. You stop needing certainty and you begin listening for meaning. You stop analyzing every outcome and you start attending to symbols. This is not about blind faith, it is about intuitive participation. You are in dialogue with existence and it is answering back. However, Jung cautioned against using synchronicity as a tool for impulsive decision-making. They are not commands, they are confirmations. They are not signs to relinquish your discernment, but mirrors of your soul's alignment. Use them to reflect, not to react. They are not maps, but milestones. When synchronicity strikes, a message on the radio after you journal a painful truth, a dream followed by a revealing encounter, it is the unconscious validating your inner work. It is the cosmos responding to your soul's whisper. And the more you pay attention, the more fluent you become in the symbolic. Your ordinary world begins to shimmer with mythic meaning. A crumbling house mirrors a collapsing identity. A sudden storm reveals a repressed emotion. A blooming flower becomes your soul's rebirth. The symbolic becomes the sacred. You are no longer merely observing life. You are reading it, living it consciously. This is not delusion. It is depth. Jung taught that awakening begins when the ego surrenders its need for dominance, and the self rises to interpret reality from the inside out. Synchronicity is not a gift given to the few. It is a function of soul alignment available to all who dare to look beyond the surface. When you live in this state, you no longer ask, "What's happening to me?" You ask, "What is this trying to reveal?" And in that shift, you begin to see not just signs, but messages. Not just patterns, but invitations. You are not lost. You are in the middle of the sacred dance between psyche and cosmos. And synchronicity is the rhythm that guides you home. There comes a moment in the inner journey when the surface no longer satisfies. The things that once brought pleasure begin to feel hollow. You watch the same shows, scroll through the same feeds, repeat the same conversations. But inside, you feel a quiet ache, a subtle nausea of the soul. This is not boredom, it is not depression. It is the call of the deeper self. Carl Jung recognized this as the hunger for meaning, the moment when the soul begins to awaken from the trance of modern distractions and seeks something real. Not stimulation, not success, but significance. You may have once worshipped at the altar of status, productivity, appearance, or control. These things offered fleeting comfort, but they never fed your essence. Now, even in moments of achievement, you sense an inner emptiness. You reach your goals, yet feel untouched. You smile at your reflection and ask, "Is this really my life?" Jung described this rupture as the collapse of the outer program, the dismantling of the persona script when it no longer serves the soul's evolution. This collapse isn't failure, it is invitation. The hunger for meaning never begins with clarity. It begins with questions. Why am I here? What am I meant to embody? What truth have I been afraid to live? These are not the musings of a lost soul, but the emergence of one that is ready to live deliberately. Jung saw these questions not as crises, but initiations. They mark the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming oneself. The soul starts to reject the artificial. You find yourself unable to tolerate surface-level interactions. Gossip, small talk, polite laughter. They become intolerable. It's not because you're growing cold. It's because your inner world is finally demanding authenticity. True connection now requires depth, honesty, and resonance. This craving for realness is not intensity. It is presence. Jung believed that healing begins when the psyche is engaged, not the mask. Not the performance, but the raw self. You seek nourishment, not noise. Endless entertainment no longer amuses you. You are drawn to sacred texts, to myth, to psychology, to ancient truths that echo with symbolic power. This isn't a phase, it's a return. Jung called it the return to the source, the soul's remembering of its own nature beyond conditioning. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You may still succeed, but success no longer defines you. You begin to realize that peace is not found in performance. It arises in alignment. When your life appears polished, but your soul feels absent, this is not a defect. It is a redirection. It is the self reminding you that fulfillment cannot be borrowed from the world. The hunger for meaning pulls you towards silence. Stillness becomes sacred. You light a candle, take long walks, speak to the stars. These rituals are not indulgences. They are how your soul breathes. Jung saw the sacred not as something reserved for temples, but as something born in devotion. When you pour your presence into the moment, it becomes holy. You begin to sense your life is not random. A deeper pattern unfolds. You walk through familiar initiations, the betrayal, the fall, the exile, the return. Your suffering becomes mythic. Your past becomes the raw material for transformation. This is no longer about fixing yourself. It's about meeting yourself. Depth no longer frightens you. You are drawn to what is beneath the surface, the grief, the rage, the awe. You begin to court the shadow, not as a threat, but as a lost part of your truth. This is courage. Most people hover on the surface because the depths are messy, uncertain, wild. But you've stopped fearing the dark. You see now that within it lies the light of your becoming. Jung warned that those who refuse to descend into their depths remain strangers to themselves. But those who do, they discover the most sacred contact of all, soul contact. And once you've tasted that truth, nothing shallow will ever satisfy again. Your dreams begin to stir with unfamiliar intensity. They no longer feel like random images floating in the dark, but arrive like sacred messengers cloaked in mystery. Some are luminous, leaving behind a gentle awe. Others are disquieting, even terrifying, waking you at odd hours with fragments that cling to your skin. A face you've never seen, a phrase you can't forget, a symbol you cannot explain but know is important. This is not your imagination. It is your unconscious speaking, whispering in the language it knows best. Metaphor. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, believing they are the clearest expressions of your soul's hidden landscape, where your conscious mind is too limited to see. When dreams begin to shift, becoming more vivid, strange, or emotionally charged, it is not a breakdown, it is the soul attempting to guide you through the chaos of transformation. Jung taught that when the persona begins to dissolve, when the ego no longer reigns as sole ruler, the deeper self emerges to lead, and its voice first echoes in dreams. Why dreams? Because the ego must sleep for the unconscious to speak freely. In the silence of night, the soul brings symbols instead of sentences. What seems irrational to the waking mind is perfectly clear to the psyche. You may dream of an old man or wise woman. That is the archetype of the sage, offering guidance. A child might appear, representing your innocence or longing for renewal. A shadowy pursuer might chase you, embodying the parts of yourself you fear, deny, or repress. You may find yourself at a threshold, a bridge, a gate, each symbolizing a crossing between identities. These are not mere stories. They are psychic revelations, telling you where you are in your inner myth. When such archetypes appear, they are not just dreams. They are rites of passage. If you've had the same dream more than once, if themes, places, or emotions recur, it is not coincidence. It is insistence. Jung believed that repetition in dreams is the soul's way of demanding recognition. Something is unresolved. A pattern, a wound, a truth too long ignored. Until you turn inward to face it, the dream will return, not as punishment, but as a call to wholeness. Even nightmares, those which leave you breathless and shaken, have their sacred purpose. They are shadow dreams, raw, unfiltered confrontations with the inner exiles of your being. You're chased because you're avoiding. You drown because you're overwhelmed. You see death because an ego layer is collapsing. Jung taught that such images are not meant to be feared, but integrated. Write them down, reflect, ask, what are you trying to show me? And the dream, if honored, will begin to reveal its truth. When your dreams are working upon you, you wake up changed. You may not recall every detail, but you feel the difference. A strange clarity, an unexpected calm, or even a deeper discomfort that somehow carries more truth than any waking reassurance. This is dream alchemy. Jung believed dreams transform the psyche from within, digesting the unconscious material you are finally ready to process. As you deepen in your awakening, dreams become less narrative and more symbolic. A house becomes your psyche, a vehicle, your life's direction, a storm, your emotional upheaval, a snake, your transformation, a mirror, your need for self-reflection. These are not decorations, they are encoded guidance. Jung insisted that dream interpretation is not about one-size-fits-all symbols, it is about personal resonance. A snake may represent danger to one, but to another, healing. It is not the image alone, but the emotional weight it carries that holds the key. The more you listen, the more you realize that your inner world is not a fantasy realm, it is another reality running parallel to your waking life. Dreams begin to guide your decisions. You make choices that echo what you felt, not what you were told. You experience someone differently because of a message you received in sleep. The line between night and day blurs, and so the seen and unseen begin to converse. You stop dismissing your dreams as illusions. You begin to ask, what part of me is creating this? In this space, you are not just a dreamer. You are a co-creator with your unconscious. This is the Jungian path, to live in communion with the depths, to treat dreams not as nonsense but as sacred companions, and to recognize that the soul speaks in symbols long before the mind can understand. When you allow your dream life to inform your waking life, you no longer live from the surface. You live from the source. There comes a moment on the path when your hands tremble not because they are weak, but because they are releasing what once felt essential. You stand at a precipice, one foot rooted in the comfort of the known, the other suspended in the unknown. And though fear wraps itself around your chest, a quieter, deeper voice within whispers, "Keep going." This is not recklessness. This is what Jung would call spiritual courage. The soul's refusal to shrink back into the mask of survival when truth begins to call it forward. Transformation always exacts a price. The death of illusions, the unraveling of outdated identities, the surrender of roles that once won us love, but now silence our truth. Jung warned that real growth demands sacrifice before reward, surrender before understanding. The fact that you feel fear but continue anyway is not a weakness. It is the purest evidence that you are on the right path. Letting go is not loss, it is initiation. You cannot awaken and remain unchanged. The self cannot rise while dragging behind the persona. Something must be released. An old belief, a familiar relationship, a past version of you that no longer fits. This is not a literal death, but an ego death. The slow, painful disintegration of false stories that once gave your life shape. The ego clings to structure, but the soul longs for meaning. And meaning never grows where the lie still lives. One of the most agonizing rites of awakening is the quiet departure of those we once loved. Not because of betrayal, but because of misalignment. Conversations grow strained, connections fade, and you feel the aching loneliness of being misunderstood. You may ask, am I wrong for changing? But deep down you know, this is not punishment, it is permission. As Jung taught, individuation, the path to psychological wholeness, requires detachment from the collective molds that shaped us. This includes family patterns, cultural ideals, and long-held bonds formed around a version of you that no longer exists. When someone leaves your orbit, as you rise, it is not always a failure. It may be the necessary cost of truth. Bless their path, let them go, and let yourself rise. As your soul awakens, the scaffolding of your old life begins to crack. Jobs that once felt purposeful now feel hollow. Conversations become mechanical. You no longer recognize the reflection staring back when you perform the roles you used to master. You're not breaking down, you are breaking open. Jung taught that what once sustained us may need to fall apart. Not because it was wrong, but because it has finished its task. The collapse is sacred. From the ruins of who you were, the seed of who you are can finally take root. Fear is not your enemy here. On the path of awakening, fear is the echo of the ego losing control. And Jung wrote, "Only boldness can deliver us from fear. And if the risk is not taken, the meaning of life is violated." So feel the fear, honor it, but do not obey it. Let it mark the threshold you are crossing, not into danger, but into deeper alignment. You will mourn, you will grieve dreams you once built your life upon. Perhaps the vision of a perfect marriage, a certain career, a public persona, or a life timeline you held dear. These griefs are not failures, they are sacred funerals. You are laying to rest a self that once protected you, but now imprisons you. You are not becoming someone else. You are remembering who you were before you learned who to be, and this remembering cannot happen without loss. The world may no longer understand you. It may grow quiet around you, but that silence is not emptiness, it is depth. Jung emphasized that the path of individuation is solitary, not because you are alone, but because you are walking ahead, beyond the mask, beyond the crowd, into the truth of your being. Others are walking too, though you may not see them. You are part of a migration of souls returning to wholeness. That is why, despite the fear, the disorientation, the ache of letting go, you continue, not because it is easy, but because something ancient in you has awakened, something that refuses to go back to sleep. Jung would say, this is the mark of true individuation, when the self begins to take the wheel and the old world recedes. Not because you're lost, but because, for the first time, you are coming home. There arrives a quiet turning point in the soul's journey, a threshold that does not declare itself with noise, but with stillness. A moment when you realize you are no longer walking alone. Not because someone has joined you on the outside, but because something has awakened within. A subtle presence begins to move beneath your thoughts, shaping your choices with a depth you didn't command. It does not shout, it does not impose, it simply is. Carl Jung named this silent guide the self, with a capital S, the unifying center of the entire psyche, the sacred axis around which both your conscious mind and unconscious depths revolve. It is not the ego, not the mask, not the identity. It is what remains when all performances end. And when it emerges, it does not ask for attention. It simply reorganizes your life from the inside out. The roles you once clung to, the achiever, the fixer, the caretaker, the rebel, the beloved, begin to feel like costumes from a past life. They were necessary once. They earned you safety, affection, and place in the tribe. But now they grow heavy, like garments that no longer fit your skin. The self requires no title, no justification. It does not scream for recognition. It radiates presence. Jung taught that the shift from ego consciousness to self-awareness is the path toward wholeness. And you will know it by what falls away: the need to be seen, the craving for validation, the hunger for applause. In its place, something richer arises, a grounded stillness, a peace that is not passive but rooted, sovereign, and whole. Where once you shaped your decisions around approval, now you move by resonance. Is this true for me? Becomes your compass. You say no without guilt. You walk away without rage. You no longer plead to be understood because you have chosen to understand yourself. The ego once fought for certainty and control, clinging to plans and identities. The self holds space for mystery. You feel grief and joy at once, clarity and confusion in the same breath. And you stop needing to resolve the tension. Jung reminded us that the self is the union of opposites, the marriage of masculine and feminine, strength and softness, intellect and intuition. To live from the self is to allow contradiction to exist without demanding immediate harmony. This is not confusion, this is maturity. You begin to lose interest in performing. Where you once needed to be admired, now you are simply present. Where you once needed to win arguments, now you value peace. You post less and reflect more. You listen deeper. The approval of others fades in importance, not from pride, but from liberation. As Jung said, the self doesn't compete, it doesn't compare, it doesn't conform. Because the self fears no invisibility. It is not here to be seen, it is here to be. The self does not demand a fixed timeline. It breathes in divine rhythm. Even when the road ahead is unclear, you sense that nothing is out of place. The delays feel like redirections. The pain feels like purification. Even your failures begin to feel like strange gifts wrapped in disguise. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is the wisdom of the self replacing the panic of the ego. You stop trying to make life happen. You begin to let life move through you. You notice patterns where others see chaos, meaning where others see coincidence. You stop seeing yourself as separate from the world and start sensing that life itself is mirroring you, inviting you, teaching you, evolving you. And perhaps the most mysterious moment of all is this. You begin to sense the sacred within yourself, not as an idea, not as doctrine, but as an intimate presence, a sacred hum beneath your breath, a trembling in your chest during a moment of beauty, an inexplicable awe as you stare at the sky. Jung called this the numinous experience, the divine not as something you chase, but as something that rises from within. You no longer seek God in places, you recognize the divine in your very being. You are not a mere seeker of the light, you are its vessel. And once you glimpse this truth, you are never the same. The self is no longer a concept, it is the pulse beneath your skin. And when that pulse becomes your guide, your past no longer defines you, your ego no longer confines you, and the world no longer controls you. You are not just awakening, you are remembering what you've always been. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But this becoming is not a straight line. It is a spiral descent into the depths of your soul, a shedding of all that is false so the truth might finally rise. So keep going, not in spite of the difficulty, but because of it. Keep going when the light dims and the path narrows. Keep going when your old life no longer fits, when your voice trembles with truth, when silence becomes your companion and the world no longer recognizes who you're becoming. Especially then, because the path you are walking is not ordinary. It is sacred. It is not paved for comfort. It is carved for transformation. You are not merely changing, you are remembering. You are reclaiming the forgotten fragments of yourself and weaving them back into wholeness. You are not walking away from life. You are walking towards soul. And no matter how heavy it feels, no matter how much you've lost, know this. The weight you carry is the gravity of your own becoming. You are not behind. You are right on time. The journey was never about perfection. It was about presence. Not about reaching a destination, but about returning to yourself. You are not lost. You are being initiated. And this rising of your soul, it is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, holy, and unstoppable. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.